When it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, there are a ton of different ways that a company can diversify its team. They can, diversity can technically include diversity of ideas, diversity of languages, skills, gender, age. And sometimes companies say that they are diverse, but in reality, they might have age and skill diversity, but they have absolutely no gender or racial diversity. So my question to you is, how do you educate people on the importance of racial equity specifically when they work in an office that has adopted a, we don't see color or we're colorblind type of mentality?
Yeah, you hear that a lot. We have a very diverse workforce, and like, well, okay, how racially diverse? And for me, it's all about race. It is you can't have an effective inclusion program or equity program without leading with race. And the problem with that is, for a lot of folks, in dominant culture, or dominating culture, which Leah Deshay said on your program, and I think that's an amazing thing. I'm going to adopt that. But yeah, folks in dominating culture seem to either intentionally or unintentionally avoid race. Because it's uncomfortable, it's interesting. A lot of the biggest barriers we have in this work is white progressives.
Yeah.
And it's and they'll talk about anything but race. So when you're so I'm jumping around a little bit here, but I think for me it's all about educating folks about how important it is to lead with race. And then people, so other identities don't matter. I'm like, well, what do you mean? Well, what about centering on gender equity, or LGBTQ IA equity, or disability equity? And I said, my response is always, so all those identities you see as white. See, that's the thing. When we picture veterans, when we picture seniors, when we picture these folks, you and I might picture them differently than other folks. And I think that's the real problem, that people don't understand that the intersectionality of race. Anytime you add race to the equation, it always adds, the deepest disparities. We see the most oppression there. So where if you have, a white person who uses a wheelchair, the experience for them would be a lot different than a black trans woman who uses a wheelchair. And so it becomes this competition, and it's really unfortunate because you can see the data. This work has to be data driven. You look at the data, you understand that race will always show us the deepest disparities. And so when we remove disparities for folks of color, we're removing barriers for everybody, creating a system that works the best for everyone. And the system wasn't created to work for everyone. I used to say that our system is broken, but it's not broken. It is so robust. It's working exactly the way it was designed to work. And systems are built to perpetuate themselves. So that's the hard work of racial equity. And so really, and how do we do that? How do we convince folks that we need to lead with race? We start with looking at the history of race. Here in Oregon, I think a lot of people look at this region, the Pacific Northwest, as kind of this progressive utopia. In a lot of ways it is, but not when it comes to race. And Oregon has a very specific, really tough history around race. You couldn't live, if you were black, you couldn't live in Oregon until 1926 legally. And if you did happen to live here before then and you were black, you were threatened with 39 lashes, the lash law that we had in Oregon. And so all the ghosts of all that history live on to today. So when you look at the history and you understand the laws and policies that have been put in place to keep power for the dominating culture, and to exclude all others, that's a tough hill to climb, to get out of all that. And it shows people that that not everybody gets to start from the same starting point. You hear all the time, well, why don't you pull yourself up by your bootstraps and work hard like I did? Well, maybe you don't have those bootstraps. And so the history, I think, is really key on showing folks. I mean, it's a real eye opener. Like I said, especially in Oregon, there's some things here that and people don't understand. Maybe I don't know how it's possible that people don't know about the incarceration of Japanese Americans. 120,000 Japanese Americans incarcerated, a lot of them American citizens, forcibly removed from their homes, put in behind barbed wire in American concentration camps. It's a part of history that you don't really hear about. I brought it up when I was a kid in school in Indiana, and the teacher said, "Jeff, I'm sure that didn't happen. I'm sure that we would, I'm sure as Americans, we would never do that to ourselves." I'm like, well,
Wow.
okay, well, let me bring someone in from Show and Tell, and he'll talk to you about his experience in the camps. But there's so much about our history that people don't know. Chinese exclusion laws,
Mm-hmm.
all this stuff, right? And the enslavement of Black people, obviously, so with a better understanding of that history and understanding that the ghosts of that history still live on today, I think people have a better understanding of why race is what we should be leading with. We try to avoid saying focus on race because focus that's the one thing and nothing else. But when you lead with it and then understand the intersectionality and understand how the different layers of oppression, Kimberly Crenshaw leads this work in intersectionality. I think kind of co-invented the term, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the challenges. So we start with history. We start with common language, making sure people understand that equity is not just another buzzword. It is a separate term from inclusion. It's a separate term from diversity. People are like, hey, I'm going to your diversity training. I'm like, no, it's not diversity training. Oh my gosh, if you're just doing diversity work, man, I hope you're doing more than that. I always kind of cringe when people are like, I'm the diversity officer, or I'm the diversity manager. I work in the diversity office. I'm like, wow, okay, so you're in charge of getting a variety of people together. And that's it. Wow. So variety is important, obviously. Diversity is important, but you've got to go, definitely beyond that. So I think I'm maybe rambling a little bit, but so we start with history, and we start really having those conversations about were you aware of this history? What was surprising or impactful for you about this history? And it's amazing how many people don't know. Folks of color, we know our history.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's shocking that others don't, right?
Yeah, and I mean, you're absolutely right about the way that legacy of history bleeds into so many of the implicit biases and just the values that people have. Everything from what people think, the standard leader looks like, or what an all-star executive team is supposed to look like. And so there's all these different layers that are included in this discussion.